Digital gene. What is that? This talk has nothing to do with what you'll find if you Google the term, and it has nothing to do with genetics. So if that's what you wanted, my sincere apologies. That's not what you're going to get. I first heard this term, the digital gene, a couple of years ago. This woman from the children's media industry said quite offhand, well, kids are born with a digital gene now. And it really took me aback because my interest is children from birth, actually pre-birth, to age 6. And to see this framing of their lives was shocking. But what I've seen is that this term, the digital gene, is part of a larger narrative, a media-centric mythology, if you will, that goes like this. Children are born with a digital gene, they're digital natives. We have to prepare them for a digital world, a digital future, a digital landscape. And therefore, it's assumed that they will have digital media from the very beginning, and they might even need to have digital media from the very beginning. Now, I do get it. Children seem to just pick up these devices, and they do seem to know right away how to use them. It's true. And it's just as natural for my daughter to go to YouTube to find out how to do something with her daughter as it was for me to go to my mother's almanac 30 years ago with her and find out how to do something. We do need to be comfortable, literate participants in the technologies of our time. I even advocate for children learning coding as part of media literacy education. However, there is something more than that narrative. There's something more human-centric, and it goes like this. We are, in fact, living, breathing, thinking, feeling, embodied humans on a living, breathing planet. And the future is, by definition, unknown. So the faculty that we all need and that we need to help our children develop to navigate that future and to take advantage of all the learning, no matter what form it takes, is attention. Now, Dr. Michael Posner, who's a developmental psychologist, says that attention is like an organ system in the body, much like respiration and circulation, and its structure is neurological. So when we're looking at developing attention, that basic neurological foundation, the forming of the structure in the first 6 years of life, is vital, because in that 6 years, there is more dynamic neural connection, and Bob pointed to that, those early impressions, that at any other time in life. There are other very dynamic times, adolescence, but this is where basic worldview is formed, in these neural connections that connect in a kind of a dance between our genetic predispositions and our environment. So if, in fact, attention depends on healthy neurological development, we need to look at some of the things that help that development in young children. And I just want to point out a few of the things, assuming that there's good nutrition, good sleep, good, safe physical conditions. The first is adult loving attention. And there are sort of 4 components to that. The first is that attention of an adult is like weather for a child. They pick up on it directly. And when an adult is not necessarily honing in, focusing in a worried kind of way, but has loving attention to a child, it's like sunshine. If you're sharing a task with a child, they're under a sort of common attention to something, it's like, wow, this is a good place to be. The neurons will fire in a way that says the world is open, there's potential, there's abundance. And the state of the adult models something for the child. So if we're centered, if we're even attempting to be centered, the child sees that potential for themselves. I have a friend who says that she remembers the first time she saw somebody actually just being simple and attentive to what they were doing, and she recognized it as something she wanted and was possible for her as a young child, and it was her grandmother stirring a pot of pasta sauce. So all of these elements are intertwined. The state, obviously, and this weather conditions are connected. But the third thing is orientation. Children tend to orient toward what the adult is oriented toward, and what the environment says is important. I'm old enough to remember when there weren't televisions in every home, which would date me if nothing else did. And the night that the television came into our home, I was standing on the stairs looking down at the living room, and I have such a visceral memory of all of the furniture moving to face the screen, and recognizing that something had happened about whether we would be facing each other or facing this screen. When we walk into the home, what seems to be the most important thing because of what's primary. The other thing is now, children, you might wake up in sheets that have media figures, put on clothing that has logos. So the question of orientation is broader and more ubiquitous with them. And because they're in a state of trust, the people who take care of them, clothe them, feed them, are bringing those things. They think they must be good for them. It must be where they are supposed to be paying attention. So it's important to look at that. And the fourth thing is vigilance, because as parents, we're always, vigilant. We're trying to do our best. And in terms of media, there are a lot of resources about how to distinguish between educational media, entertainment media, advertising. The American Academy of Pediatrics has very good resources on their website about media. But the one point I'd like to make about that, in terms of accessing resources and trying to find information, is that there are two kind of perspectives. There's one that puts children in the center of the question and development. That's like AAP, American Academy of Pediatrics, and they see a whole constellation of things. And then there are people who put children plus media as assumed in the middle of the question, and they tend to be more from the communications aspect. So they have different emphases, they do different work, and it's important when you're reading an article, about something, some sort of media is bad for your child or good for your child, to look beyond the surface of the article and see what the perspective of the writer or the person who did the study is. So the second thing I want to talk about is the free play. It's very important that children have the freedom to be exploring their environment. And we know this, free play, everybody knows it's very good for children to play freely. They learn a lot of social things there. But people say, well, if digital media is part of the environment, why wouldn't we encourage children to explore with that? And there's a fundamental difference there, because in free play, the fundamental thing is it's open-ended and it's self-initiated, whereas with digital media tools and apps, there is only one prescribed way, only the way it's programmed. It can only do that thing. So it's a very important distinction. The other thing about manipulation and relationship with the environment is it's quiet. Leaving time where the child can just be quiet and observe. We give our children a tremendous gift when we allow time that just isn't programmed, where we're not worried about them being entertained or engaged, where they can just be observing and listening. It's a tremendous skill, for one thing. But this stillness is something that is very important for all of us in terms of attention. And Sherry Turkle from MIT points out in her book, Alone Together, that if we don't allow our children, help them to know how to be alone, they will always be lonely, because they'll always be seeking connection. So my undergraduate students are concerned about their younger siblings and relatives, even though they're only 9 or 10 years younger, because they see this radical change in play and this absence of any time that isn't connected. So it's an important issue. Going on to narrative, a very important part of neural development is stories. Stories use a lot of our neural connections. So in the early years, we all know children love stories. Stories are down through the ages, how we've passed on culture and tradition. And we're surrounded by popular culture stories. And the through lines of popular culture stories are, you can never look good enough, you can never have enough stuff, and violence is an acceptable way to solve conflict. When those narratives come with strong visuals, it can be extremely overwhelming for a child. One of the pivotal moments in my own work was years ago. I founded a craft center for children, and we were making bread one day, and we were sitting around, and everybody had the dough, and I looked up and I thought, wow, it's been like 4 or 5 minutes. We've all been quiet. Everybody's just kneading their dough, and my idea of heaven, and it was like, this is why I started the center, to have these opportunities. And this little girl next to me looked up and said, the Lion King video is too loud. And what is this? I thought maybe it's on the street, somebody has the music or something. And I said, I don't hear it. She said, it's in my head. And that was the moment that the idea, the intellectual study of how these images are intruding on imagination and attention became real. And I knew I had to, go work on it. So, all of these things take time. We can bring these strong tools of our own stories to our children. And we have family stories. We have the habit of, at the end of the day, exchanging how the day went. And when we go back over vacations or trips to the park with a child and we say what we saw and they say what they saw, narrative psychologists call that thickening the story. And it really helps children with empathy, because they see that there is actually more than one way to the same event happened, and different people had different impressions about it. We have our larger family stories, maybe of immigration, of whatever trials, sufferings, successes the family had, and then we have our faith, our humanist, our ethnic stories, a rich trove of stories to bring to children, make them feel situated in the world. Robin Fivush and her colleagues at Emory University did research on myth and ritual in American life. And they found that adolescents who know the family stories are exponentially more resilient in adolescence about drug use, alcohol use, truancy. It makes a difference. All these things take time. And parents do not need guilt about not having time. So the way that I appreciate framing the question about time is to look at what's already there. What pockets of time are already there, going to and from places that can be repurposed? And also, you could change your schedule if you can, which is great, but maybe people can't, so they can see where they can find time. And greetings and partings are very important for children. I hear from preschool teachers that very often children are excited at the end of the day. They have a story to tell, drawing to show, and the parents there, their phone, get your coat, get your coat. We don't need guilt, but we do need awareness. And if we take the step back and we put relationship and healthy development in the center of the question, popular culture and media can reorient and can actually serve us. And we won't be alone. There's a groundswell of people who are trying to find time for each other, trying to find how to use digital media intentionally and not be so obsessed with it. We need to encourage each other to share ourselves, our stories, our time, our attention with our young children. because we're laying the groundwork for maybe more difficult conversations that are going to come. It will help in the future. And it's amazing that the kind of societal shift that's happening. The people in Silicon Valley, according to an article in the New York Times, a lot of them, where do they send their children? Waldorf schools, media-free Waldorf schools. Bill Gates' kids didn't have their cell phones until they were 12 years old. They know something, because in fact, if that myth is true, if children do adapt these things so easily and so from the beginning, what is the rush? If it's so important to have these sensory experiences, to have healthy connection with family and narratives, why not do that first? It's going to lay the groundwork for being able to use everything in life and to face the future, which is unknown, with agency and joy. From my point of view, that's an investment worth making. Thank you.